Next up under the Special menu, we've got the Acid Looping Tools, Edit Acid Properties, Edit Sample, and Edit Tempo. We're going to kind of do something separate on building acid loops a little bit later on in a separate movie. But now we're just going to touch on these tools just so you can be familiar with them and understand kind of the ins and outs of a few of them. Next up under the Special menu, we've got Acid Looping Tools. We've got basically some tools that are really useful in creating acid loops that are specifically going to be used in acid. Now you can create loops that are used in lots of other places. You can use them in GarageBand, and you can use them in Logic and all kinds of other programs. Matter of fact, just about every audio program today that's out there, especially the multi-track ones, have some kind of capability for incorporating loops into them. Acid is kind of the granddaddy of them all. Also happens to be a Sony product, and but it has some real specific requirements and some real specific needs that it has for the data that is required to be in the file to call it an acid loop. So we'll look at some of that stuff. Let's go ahead and look at some of these first commands here, though. If I take our sample, we've got here part of a song. If I zoom in a little ways, and let's say just select this section right here. What these acid looping tools do is I can take that selection, I could cut it in half. These are really good tools for use in terms of isolating specific beats or hits. So if you're trying to isolate like a cymbal hit or something along those lines, it's really good to be able to take that and be able to use these tools to process it. Additionally, you can shift the selection left or right. So I can shift it left, or I can shift the selection right. Depending upon the size of the selection, it'll basically just literally, take whatever section you have selected and shift it that same size to the left or to the right. Again, can be really helpful, especially if you're in very high magnification modes, really fine detail, looking to be able to replicate and isolate specific sections. The last tool is Rotate Audio, which basically allows you to take a selection and kind of flip it to the front of a whole group of a sample, or flip it to the end depending upon where it's located. The next item down here is Acid Properties, Edit Acid Properties. And this is one of the kind of the main important dialog boxes. And again, we'll talk more about creating a specific loop in a separate movie, but basically it allows you to put parameters into the metadata of the loop that you're creating, so that when you take it into Acid, it then has the capability of functioning as kind of just a dumb loop, which means that you put it into Acid and you can just loop it basically. Or if it has some attributes that allow Acid to then apply some of its cool features to, such as I'm able to transpose it, I'm able to beat map it, I'm able to actually move it so that I can actually change the tempo on it and by changing the number of beats. So it gives me a lot of flexibility in adding information in here that's important for Acid in terms of the file structure. Next down here is Edit Sample. And I'll show you this one in a little bit more detail. Let's zoom back out here so we get the whole file. And let's deselect this. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's just play a little bit of this and listen. So I could probably do a loop for about the first 5 seconds approximately. I could make a loop out of that. Let's listen to it again, and it seems like there's a pretty obvious point, and I'll hit stop when I hit the point where we could then loop it back around on itself. So right there, we should be able to loop it back around on itself. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit more. And then what we're going to do is, and it's sometimes helpful to do this, I'm going to keep my finger on the M key on the keyboard so that I can drop a marker where my loop point is going to be. So it'll help me zero in on it when I want to go back to it. So let's hit play by hitting the space bar. So there's my marker where I think my loop point is. So let's go ahead and select from there all the way to the beginning. And now we'll go up here to Edit Sample. And I'm going to make this not a one-shot. I'm going to make it a sustaining loop. And it's going to be an infinite loop, so meaning that I want it to literally, again, the data that information that I'm putting in this dialog box is stuff that is going to be metadata that's going to be appended into the file. So it's data that's going to be added into the file itself when it's saved out, so that if you import it into some other kind of MIDI triggering device, or you import it into an external device, such as a sampler or even ACID or something along those lines, it will have information associated with the file that will tell it how to treat this particular loop. So is it going to be an infinite loop? It can be looped over and over and over and over again, or is it going to have a finite loop count, and then I can enter a number in, kind of thing. But right now it's telling me where the start point, the end point, and the length of it is. Let's go ahead and play it and see how accurate we were in terms of our selection. Okay, that's not so good. There's a gap there, and the gap, just in visually looking at the file, the gap looks like it's at the beginning of the file. So how do I get that to not be there so that it seamlessly loops? Well, let's go ahead and make an adjustment here. I'm going to adjust the start time a little bit, and now let's play it. Aha! Much better. So we're going to say OK to that, and boom, there we go. We have our sustaining loop. We'll go a little bit further here under the, and we can also edit the tempo here if we wanted to. For example, if we wanted to adjust the length of the selection and make it to be a specific number of beats that would affect the tempo and the beats per minute and stuff like that. We could also determine how many beats are in a measure, which has to do with the time signature. We can input all of that data here that will then be appended to and saved to the file. But when I've got my loop here like this, another way that I can zero in to make sure that the loop is really seamless is a dialog box that we looked at just briefly in the previous view menu, but it makes a lot more sense and it helps a lot more right here, and that is the loop tuner. And then let's open that up. Now what we've got here in the loop tuner is we've got basically the end of the loop and then the beginning of the loop. And we can see how the waveforms match up against each other. And we actually have the ability to adjust the waveforms. So we can actually determine so that there's no popping at the crossing point. So I can look for the next zero crossing, and we can look for it there. We can play it as a sample. Sounds pretty good. I think we're really close. This allows you to move to where the next zero crossing is. These increments allow you to incrementally very fine-tune where the samples are. So right there, for example, is another good spot where you can see that they actually join together here. Let's go ahead and play it again. So you have a lot of flexibility, a lot of power within the editor here. You know, you can also play post loop, you can play the loop itself, pre-loop, and you can actually select where you're going to what the loop is that you're going to play. If you have multiple sustaining loops selected within your one file, for example. So the loop editor gives you a lot of power and a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to fine-tune your loop so that it's absolutely right on. So when you take it into whatever software you want to use, it's going to sound great.